This guide covers how to use references and why you should do so, the importance of visualizing in shapes, 3D space including lighting and perspective, color depth, how to improve, how to create an art style and how to change your art style, step-by-step drawing exercises to help you practice, as well as create illustrations, and lastly, tips that have worked for me or that I wish I knew when I first started. A reference is some kind of imagery to refer to or draw inspiration from when we're drawing. It's the single most helpful thing for creation because art is just a mixture of references and creativity. The most common forms of references are images or pictures and real-life views, in the case of still life. Sometimes we copy the exact reference and other times we copy the shape, mood, or colors of the piece to create something more original. Why do we use references? Unless we have a photographic memory, we can't remember enough detail to draw an accurate representation of something. Even if you think you know what it looks like because you've seen it before and can recognize it when you see it, you're only going to be able to draw a simple or even distorted version. Here's a squirrel drawn without reference and a squirrel drawn with reference. It is somewhat possible to draw something decent without references, and obviously this squirrel only looks this atrocious because it was drawn in 10 seconds, but it takes a much longer time through trial and error to be decent without references, so you can just save yourself time instead by using them. When I first started, I was stuck on creativity and didn't want to use reference images because it felt like copying or cheating, and you might feel the same way, but in reality, we're not going to know how to draw something we haven't drawn before, and we're not going to improve if we don't know how to draw anything, so it's always better to have something to reference than none at all, so that one day you can reach that stage of drawing a whole illustration without any references. When you're looking up images, obviously, for personal practice you can use whatever you want, but if you're gonna publish your art on social media, I suggest filtering license by free to modify, share, and use commercially. So how do we use references? If we're referencing someone else's creation to design something, we're not copying it exactly, but copying the general shapes of the reference or certain unoriginal parts of it. The key is to use multiple reference images and combine all the parts we referenced from each image with our own creativity to create new designs. For example, if you want to draw a blouse and you don't know much about fashion, look at all the different types, decide if you want to include individual parts that could make up a blouse like sleeves, ruffles, lace, etc., and pick a few images to reference. Now you can decide where to place these parts and add additional details from your own ideas like a color change, pattern change, or adding more elements to the piece. The result should look different from any one image you referenced. Sometimes we have to draw in a different point of view or angle than what's shown in the references, so it's useful to get images showing multiple angles so that we can draw more freely. Creating a design itself will make it easy for us to visualize it in 3D, which naturally helps us draw the same design in different angles. You can create a reference board if you want to look at all your images at once. There's two options right here. This one looks really good actually. When did this come out? I currently have PureRef, which I liked because you don't have to save images to your computer to use them. You can just copy and paste from the internet into PureRef that you download. It's free if you want it to be. You'll find every link ever in my description box. Now if you look at my ugly reference board over here and my unfinished illustration, you'll notice that, I'm sorry, can you even see this? I referenced my friend's sketch that he gave me. That was the base of my illustration. I obviously copied pea shooters and puff shrooms because this is fan art. I combined these houses together and I mindlessly referenced these trees, which I shouldn't have because they're in the wrong perspective. This whole illustration is drawn like we're looking down at the scenery here, but these trees are drawn like we're looking straight at them. Speaking of perspective, let's get into shape and dimension. Three of the most important principles are shape, 3D visualization, and depth. Character design tutorials always emphasize shape. Bubbly characters usually have round eyes and puffy hair, while calm characters are drawn with narrow eyes and straight hair. Shapes are important in illustration too. Design is a big part of the illustration process because you have to design your original creations to draw them, but even if you're not drawing original art, visualizing in shapes is still really helpful. You can highlight the reference you're drawing first and then draw it separately. Think of it as grouping. It's a quick way to recognize shapes and parts so that you have an easier time drawing it. So we already know it's important to visualize shapes in 3D, so we can draw them in different angles, but a couple other reasons include lighting and perspective. A classic starter practice is drawing simple 3D shapes like cubes, cylinders, and spheres. This is to learn 3D concepts like light and shadow. The side the light source is shining on is the brightest, whereas the sides next to it is a little darker. The side directly opposite to the light is dark, and the point of contact with the ground is the darkest. And then there's light bouncing off surfaces, so there would be a brighter area here. What is it bouncing off of? The white background. What's important is recognizing and applying these principles to more complicated shapes that you will actually use in your illustrations, because in reality these simple shapes are not your end product, so even after this exercise, these lighting principles may still not be obvious to you. To prevent that, I suggest practicing with different shapes, manipulations, and textures in addition to the simple ones. Of course, the shape of the shadow changes depending on what position the light is shining from. If the light is shining on top, there is no shadow spreading out on one side. On a side view, the shadow is shorter when the light is up here and longer when the light is down here. Rather than someone telling you this, though, you can learn more intuitively by interacting with the environment yourself, like moving the light source around and seeing the changes. You can easily do this in person by drawing still life with a lamp or another light source and some home objects. If you want to learn lighting on the human figure, take selfies under lighting and draw your own face or figure as a start. There are also sites like Magic Poser, which is mainly a pose creator for characters but has a light source that you can control. If you want to advance further into 3D, you can download Blender, a free modeling program. Everything I tried to explain about lighting you can see as soon as you create a new project and move the light source around. It's useful for interactive learning because you can automatically see the lighting on whatever shape you see, make, or import. I would only suggest trying Blender if you have interest in 3D modeling though, or if you have significant difficulty visualizing in 3D, because it's pretty extra, and sites like Magic Poser have basic geometric shapes and figures with a light source if those are simply all you need for practice. That being said, the biggest positive to learning basic 3D modeling is that now you can automatically imagine 2D drawings in 3D outside of the program, which helps you draw illustrations. I'm not an expert at drawing in perspective, but I still wanted to talk about it because I think it's really important for 2D artists to be able to draw 3D spaces. It makes drawings look more dynamic compared to if they were just flat. Perspective drawing replicates how the human eye sees the world in the most basic sense. Objects closer to you look bigger compared to objects further away that look smaller even if the original size is bigger. Many action poses that face the viewer are drawn in a dramatic perspective so that we can immerse ourselves into the scene. The easiest way to learn and understand perspective is by drawing rectangles. The easiest way to incorporate what we learned is by drawing buildings and rooms. Perspective is commonly taught in 1 to 3 point perspectives. That means there are up to 3 vanishing points. A vanishing point is made up of 2 perspective lines. It's the point that disappears from us, the one that's furthest away. 2 out of 3 vanishing points must be placed on the horizon line, which is our eye level. Objects below the horizon line are below our eye level, which means we're looking down at it, so you can see the top of an object, and you can see the bottom of an object that is above your eye level because you're looking up at it. Of course, the real world is made up of so many more points and lines. It's impossible to recreate the perspective that exists in real life because there are too many lines, which is why we simplify them. A common use for 1 point perspective is centered hallways and rooms, but the points don't have to be centered or at a specific place on the horizon line. 2 points on either side means it looks further away on each side and closer to us at the center. In 3 point perspective, the third point is not on the horizon line, resulting in lines that are not perpendicular, unlike 1 or 2 point perspectives. The more points, the more dramatically 3D it looks. It's probably best to draw in 2 point perspective because 1 is too basic and 3 gets too ugly sometimes. Not gonna lie, you have to use it in moderation or use it right at certain angles. Think of the viewer as a camera angle. In a movie, it would be unusual to see someone or something in a dramatic perspective, but we also usually wouldn't see them in a space that looks too two-dimensional. You can recognize perspective by referencing images in certain perspectives and easily practice perspective by recreating these or challenge yourself to create something new with the same perspective. We practice perspective by drawing rigid structures because that's easier. It's harder to draw curved lines like landscapes and figures in perspective, which is where references are incredibly useful. You can also start with boxes as guidelines and place the object or figure accordingly. There are common ways to give an illustration a sort of 3D feel, such as giving more detail to the focus area of the piece, while other areas are drawn more roughly with less detail. Objects that are far away can be drawn as a whole shape and colored as if they're foggy. Digital artists sometimes blur out a side or sides, background, or front object that doesn't require attention like a camera lens behaves to give spatial depth. Color depth is a big factor of art style because depending on what your art style is, you'll either stop at one layer of colors or add more on top. You might notice that some artists apply one shadow layer while others apply multiple or none at all. It's largely dependent on another factor of art style, how realistically you draw your characters. For example, chibi art is usually cel shaded, while semi-realism is usually soft shaded with more shades. Comics and animations usually range between chibi and semi-realism. I didn't recognize depth for a long time because I didn't realize that my illustrations didn't have enough contrast until someone told me. An exercise to prevent this if you're not using a reference is by drawing in grayscale, filling in the darkest parts in black and the lightest parts in white, so that you could get used to the contrast because it's hard to recognize value differences in color. It's part of the reason why sometimes digital artists draw in this style, then color correct or glaze to change the color later on. The answer to improvement is always practice, but how exactly do you practice? Here are my exercise recommendations in chronological order. The first one is the perfect circle exercise. Although an incredibly simple exercise, they say if you can easily make a perfect circle, you must be good at drawing, or at least line art, and this is because the circle exercise helps you produce steady, accurate strokes. Croquis is basically timed still life or live life sketch practice. So you basically have already been doing this if you drew your shapes. It's the best way to improve, especially when you time your practice, because you're forced to draw more efficiently, starting from mapping out the general shapes to finer details, which leads to steadier, longer strokes rather than short, messy lines, which is very important for sketch and line art. When we draw a line, it naturally curves because our hand rotates around our wrist. Loosen up your grip and hold your pen or pencil further away from the tip to make bigger and straighter strokes. Try to draw with your shoulder instead of your wrist to prevent wrist injuries that artists commonly suffer. Nude croquis is the single best way to improve figure drawing and speed, especially if you want to draw comics or people in general. You just automatically get better at drawing natural poses and shapes without realizing or making a conscious effort to do so. You get faster at drawing because you'll get used to finishing each sketch in 3 to 5 minute intervals whenever the pose changes. But who can afford that, am I right? So you can practice with 3D models or online images and time yourself if you want to be able to draw faster. The key is to sketch for a few minutes and move on to the next sketch even if you haven't completed the one before. Repeat this about 5 times and you'll get exhausted soon enough. Next is the mix and match exercise. Begin creating a full illustration by referencing an object from various images. I took the buildings from this picture, sky layout from this one, and the colors of this other one, and then if you add something else from your imagination, wow, look at you go, already on the right path. I think drawing fan art is actually a good way to practice because you can get hands-on experience rotating a reference pose, drawing character design, and converting one art style to another. You have to imagine it in 3D, and even though it's not your own character design, you still have to recognize every part that makes up the design and execute it, which will definitely help you create your own characters like how detailed your design should be. Watch other tutorials. Not now. I didn't go over every single thing like color theory because you don't need it in the beginning when you're only using references to draw because you can reference the colors, but learn more when you're ready because there are other topics like composition, and that's the only one I can think of right now. Personally, learning how to draw certain subjects like hands never seemed to help me because the way I draw, I just kind of start from one place and go to another instead of creating a framework first, and if you're like me, Croquis will do so much more for you than subject-based tutorials of how to draw that thing you're not drawing. Art style is a combination of factors like how real something looks, the usage or absence of line art, the style of line art, texture, blending style, lighting style, dimension, the way atmosphere is portrayed or not portrayed on blank space or different surfaces, and more. I've seen many people confuse body type as a factor of art style, but I think it's a factor of character design because characters can be drawn in the same art style but have different body types. I feel like a common mistake beginners make is starting their art journey in an anime-inspired style, purely for the style itself, and I think it's where a lot of errors such as anatomy mistakes form because they haven't studied what anything actually looks like in real life. However, it's important to do so in order to correctly draw in the style that you want, because every art style is sort of a variation of realism. Start with realism using references that exist in the real world. Apart from it being the easiest to do because you don't have to add anything creative to your reference, it allows you to be able to develop different kinds of art styles. We look at the same references, it's the resulting illustration that's different. The extent that you change from your reference varies. So starting from that default reference style helps you analyze different art styles so you can keep making the necessary changes until you find the one you want to keep as your own original art style. After you study a little realism and get used to drawing, you can start developing your own art style. No art style is completely original. Creating an art style is just like using references to draw something creative. You're combining the aspects you like with your own ideas to produce a style that looks different from any one style you referenced. First, you need to be aware of your preferences. It's important to recognize the individual aspects that you like to develop your own style, and analyzing artists' work is the most efficient way to go about it. Analyze the art that you like and don't like. What specifically do you like, and why do you like it? Is it because the colors are blended in a way that presents a soft atmosphere, or because cel shading looks clean? Maybe you like the combination of soft and hard paint. What specifically don't you like about an art piece that you think is ugly? You need to know so you're not accidentally doing it too. Contemplate how they drew their lines and colored in the way that looks good or bad to you. Is it because the lines are thin or because they're thick? Maybe you like that there's line thickness variation, or you actually like when there's no variation. How many shades of lighting did they apply? Do you like the depth, or do you like when it's more flat? Maybe you like how the artist portrayed the skin, but don't like how they rendered the hair. In this case, don't reference the hair. Mix and match all these different ideas to start developing your own style. You might already have a subject and style preference, but seeing all the diverse styles and what you can do with each one might change that, so keep an open mind. You're not going to discover what you enjoy the most or what you excel at if you don't experiment. Experimenting with tools is easy when you're drawing digitally because you can download new brushes, but if you're drawing traditionally, try using whatever pencils, colored pencils, paints, and markers you have access to. There's a difference between the styles that you're good at and styles that you love seeing but can't seem to use properly. You might love an artwork that is drawn in a style that you don't think you're ever going to try for yourself. Just because you use the same tools as an artist doesn't mean you can replicate what they were able to do with those tools. But I think it's beneficial for you to attempt to use those same tools to see if you will enjoy using them, because you might like what certain tools can produce in the end, but not like the feeling of applying them during the creation process. For example, I liked the convenience of traditional colored pencils and the final product resulting from them, but I hated using them because you have to press so hard to cover the texture of paper and my hand would be dying if it wasn't already dead. I wanted to use Copic markers so bad, but how can I when I have 3, because I bought them one at a time and never again. In digital art, I don't like this brush, but I like what you can do with it, the resulting style. I was okay with the swatch, but really didn't like how it applied, then was surprised by how much it continuously caught my eye. I thought I loved this brush because the swatch was nice, until I started using it, because it doesn't apply very vividly or evenly, and I don't even know how I feel about the result. So try experimenting, and who knows, you might end up changing your workflow. It's easy to become fixated on having a unique and recognizable signature art style, but don't worry about art style too much. For some artists, every art piece they draw has the same vibe because their art style is the same. And although this is partly because many artists stick to what they've always done in terms of color saturation, subject matter, mood, and whatnot, it's harder to create a different vibe with the same art style. You could decide whether you want that for yourself, but don't feel pressured to decide anytime soon or ever. You don't have to stick to one art style. It's okay if you're versatile instead. Your illustration might call for a specific art style. For example, if you want to draw a cute illustration, maybe you want to draw in a more chibi art style. We have to talk about tracing because it can be such a black and white topic. If you're completely new, I think tracing photographs of nature or objects is not a bad exercise because it gets you used to how things normally look in real life without a filter that is your own art style. Trace whatever your focus is, like if it's animals or humans for example, trace poses so you can familiarize yourself with the shapes. There are some benefits to tracing. It prepares you for line art actually, so if you had some tracing practice in it would make tracing your sketch a lot easier and faster. It's because I didn't have tracing experience that lining is still one of the most difficult tasks I struggle with, and there is of course no other reason why that would be the case. Another use for tracing is when you want to change your art style. I think everyone has a default art style that sets them apart from everyone else's, which is why no one's art looks the exact same from the start. And I think this is because without looking at references, there is a certain way that something looks in your head that you perceive is correct, so that's how you're going to draw it. Even if you want to draw the same thing a different way, you end up drawing the same lines over and over again. Tracing helps neutralize your default art style so you can start from realism before any creativity is added. So if you want to develop your art style from scratch, I think neutralizing your art by tracing photos of real-life subjects is an exercise worth trying, especially if you're a complete beginner, because anything you try to draw as a complete beginner will tend to look off even with a reference. It's important not to just mindlessly copy lines, but actually register where each line and curve meet and the shapes they make up so you have an easier time drawing it on your own in the future. When you get used to line work, you should move on to drawing with references instead of tracing, because drawing is a much better practice and learning experience. If you don't know what pencil to get because there's 18 different kinds sold separately, my favorite is 4B. It's sort of in the middle of pencils ranging from lightest to darkest. If you need to paint on top of your sketch, however, it would be better to get a lighter pencil. If you use colored pencils, please use cardstock paper or wood instead of the flimsy A4 paper that gets crumpled up the moment you try to transport it elsewhere. They're all sold at Michael's, every art supply. It's actually really fun drawing on wood and black cardboard stock compared to the other colors, because on black paper the colors appear more vividly so you don't have to press as hard. Focus on your desired subject matter, but also branch out to help you grow as an artist. Drawing a variety of subjects and not just the one that you're used to or good at already expands your creative potential because you're exposed to more possibilities of diverse imagery, which helps you think of new ideas and designs. Challenge yourself to diversify your subject matter once in a blue moon. If you don't draw frequently, you're going to forget how to draw things, and then you're going to be frustrated because the thing that you were able to draw before, now you can't because you don't remember how. So you need to look at references, and it makes you feel so pathetic because you're devolving. You need to repetitively draw the same thing to be able to draw it without reference. I had pictures of my ear that I referenced every time I drew a head, and there was a time I could draw ears without looking at the pictures, but after taking a long break from drawing, as I do every other month it seems, I couldn't remember how to draw it anymore, so I felt stupid having to look back at it again. Now I have line drawings of ears that I made to pathetically refer to them again. Drawing regularly and the same things regularly is important for improvement. Don't finish your illustration in one sitting. Apart from it being unhealthy to remain sitting for long periods of time, you can work more efficiently and feel less frustration when you haven't already been drawing for hours on end. Flip your canvas if you're drawing digitally, or just leave it be for a while if you're drawing traditionally, and come back in a few hours or the next day. You'll notice something off that you didn't before. It's common to like your piece when you're working on it because you worked on it for too long and got used to it so it looks completely fine, then hate it the next day because you notice everything about it that looks off. Like I drew this months ago as a webtoon art style, and I thought this was gonna be the art style for this webtoon, but looking back at it now, I'm really glad I didn't start drawing the episodes, because why are the eyes so huge? I really thought this was a good idea. You could also take a step back and view your illustration from far away. A lot of masterpieces have very loose details up close. How sharp details are up close is a personal style preference, but how they look as a whole further away should be unified and eye-catching enough to make everyone want to view the artwork. Don't avoid drawing something you struggle with. If you're not confident drawing something specific, like hands for example, don't hide it in your illustration. Use references to draw them and practice drawing them until you're comfortable enough to freehand it without references. Many beginner artists find it difficult to draw hands, but it's also one of the most convenient problems to solve because it's very easy to practice drawing hands since we all have hands. Practice hand poses in perspective, or poses that people will probably take when combined with a body instead of the default 360 angle views, because you're probably not going to draw these unnatural hand poses in your illustration, so they won't really help. Watch painting processes on YouTube. This is a huge one. You learn so much just by watching how someone draws. What better way is there to know what type of brush an artist used in an illustration and how they used it? You can discover new ways to use the brush you've always been using, or find new discoveries entirely. Get into the habit of taking pictures. This will help a lot because you can use those as reference photos. Everything you're looking for may be online, but surprisingly a lot of the times they're not, especially if you're looking for something specific you already have in mind. It's also just good to have a set of pictures you can reference for random drawings that you don't have a vision for, or if you're at a creative block. If you're putting your work out there in public, it's also much safer to use your own references because you have so much more freedom on how much you can copy without having to mix and match this and that, so no one can tell you used a specific reference off the internet that might not be copyright free. Look around your physical area for any reference pictures. If you're struggling to draw houses, look out your window and you'll probably see some houses you can reference. Just seeing the different roof, window, and door designs surprisingly helps a lot. It's also not illegal to take a picture of the exterior of the house outside of the owner's property, at least in the United States, if you want a photo for reference. You can be productive by observing the objects, scenery, people, the angles they form, and how they interact with light. Remembering this when you're drawing will help you create an environment in certain ways, like how light can shine on something and the way shadows stretch out on surfaces that are not leveled. Realizing how the world in real life can look and incorporating the principles you found to your own illustrations will help create a more dynamic piece and perhaps even contribute to creating your own art style. If you're in school, take advantage of what's available to you in art class and branch out for the experience because you might not have a chance in the future. Trying out different tools and mediums helps you recognize the tools used in artwork, and then you can figure out if you really want to buy all these separate bottles of acrylic paint or colors of markers. Art is high risk, low return in the beginning, so figure stuff out before you go too broke. If you're not in school anymore, then you can learn about all the different tools, see how they work, and decide which ones you want to try out first, or become like me and sell all your supplies and sacrifice your Nintendo to get a tablet so you can imitate any tool. Oh my god, we're finally done? We covered a ton of topics, but if you had to remember one, it would be references because they are the key to almost everything from perspective to color to design. Don't struggle with your imagination, but don't rely on references too much to let your creativity through. You should still be able to fill in the blanks with a few reference angles and not need a full-on 360 view of something. You should be able to manipulate your reference however you want, like put something flat in 3D perspective or change the color and vibe of a reference. Take advantage of references as an aid to your own ideas rather than restricting yourself to them. I hope this video was helpful. Let me know if it was, or if you have any questions or suggestions in the comments. Like if you like, subscribe if you like. Thank you to my subscribers, and thank you everyone for watching. I better see you next time.